You know, politicians say they care, but most times they don't. They don't care about you, your family or your future. All they care about is being re-elected. So in year one, after an election, they blame their opponents for how bad things are. They collect as much money as they can together. And in the second year, they continue it for a while and collect more and more cash, close more and more programs down, so that finally in year three, they can release all that money to the community and said it was hard, we made the tough decisions, and now we should be re-elected, and hope that you'll go to the polls and re-elect them. It's a very cynical view, but it's the pattern in Australian politics, I'd say even from all sides of politics for a long time. And it's a pattern that means that what suffers are not just the pensioners and all Australian citizens, but the truth. When truth prevails over injustice, then we've got a country that we can really be proud of. Then we've got an economy that we can really support, that can support our people. And we've got to project forward to create a better future for ourselves and for our children and for those around us. So this lunch today is not about reviewing the budget and what's wrong with the budget. It's about really setting the truth free in the Australian community so that you'll know, and members of the media will know, what the true situation is about Australia's economy. The whole budget is based on the premise that Australia's got a debt problem, that we're in a lot of debt. As you'll see up there are the statistics of Australia's current debt. It's the World Economic Outlook from the International Monetary Fund. And in blue, you've got Australia's current debt in 2013. And if you have a look in the other colour, red, you've got the average debt in the OECD. While Australia's current debt is around 12%, the average debt for OECD countries is at 73%. Yet we're supposed to have a debt problem. Nothing could be further from the truth. In actual fact, when the Abbott government was elected, our debt was around $200 billion. It's now gone to around $600 billion. It sounds a lot of money, but really it isn't. It accounts for about 1/3 of our GDP every year in operating sense. So it's really not much. I'm sure all of you have got more than a couple of months' debt in your lives. So why do they do it? Primarily to get re-elected. So there you see the percentage of debt. Net debt is a percentage of GDP. Over here we've got Australia. 1991, you can see how it's gone down with our surplus, and where we are at the moment at 12.1%. So debt's not the real issue. We don't have any problem with debt. I'm not suggesting that we borrow a lot of money, but I don't think it's good to lie to the Australian people about our current situation for an excuse to try to take money from pensioners, cut back our programs and make things so bad for everybody. This next graph tells you about the total central government debt, and you'll see down the bottom here is Australia at 11%, and along here are most of the developed countries of the world, including the United States. So you can see our debt level comparatively with all other countries, Italy, Korea, Luxembourg, Mexico, New Zealand, Portugal, Slovakia, is minuscule. Yet we've got a debt problem. And that's the reason why we've got all these draconian measures taking place at the moment. This source of data is from the OECD, prepared by the Australian Parliamentary Library. So are we seeing the true picture about our economy? And is our press in this country truly free to report not just what politicians say, but to analyse and look at what the facts are? Because the public does have a right to know. This next graph talks about our net interest payments. And you can see from the graph what they were in 1995, 96. They were up here. And they've been coming down ever since, and now we're back up to there. They amount to 0.6 of 100 million, I think it is. So it's not very significant at all. The next graph shows the economic statistics from the Consumer Price Index. So it's a question of how much inflation do we have in our economy. And you'll see in March 2014, our inflation rate was around about 2.9%, one of the lowest inflation rates in the whole OECD and the whole world. So our economy is not too heated up, it's not out of control. We have one of the lowest levels of debt. And Rupert Murdoch was right when he went to the IPA dinner in Sydney last year, and he said, one of the disturbing things I can't understand about Australia is it's got one of the lowest debt levels in the world. In point of fact, with the third lowest debt level in the whole OECD. Yet suddenly the Treasurer says that we've got a debt problem. And for that reason, we've got to impose a new tax on people so we get the debt down. We've got to do the heavy lifting. Well, I'll be proposing a private member's bill to the Parliament that says that the pension rate, the entitlement for pensions, which they say will be 70, should be applied also to the super of parliamentarians. You know what will happen then? They'll reduce the pension rate down to 49 or something. That's what they're all about, really. Again, looking at unemployment in Australia and comparing it with other OECD countries, we see that in OECD countries the average has gone to 8%, yet unemployment in Australia is around 5.5% in the fourth quarter of 2013. And the source of that is from the OECD database, downloaded on the 6th of May 2014, prepared by the Parliamentary Library here in Canberra. So there isn't a crisis of debt, there isn't a crisis of managing the budget, but we have an ideological war taking place between one side and the other in politics, when the preeminent thing to do is to make sure they get re-elected. So they want to project to you that things are bad, they're really, really bad, knowing that they're going to get better when they get elected for the election. And what happens in the meantime is a lot of innocent people suffer. You imagine being 87 years of age, having a pension of $300 a week, now having to pay $7.50 for your visits to the doctor. Because of your advanced age, you've got to go 4 or 5 times a week, so you lose $40 of the $300 you've got just going to see the doctor. And then if the doctor prescribes you medicine, you lose another $5 for that prescription. So you're left with about $200 to live on. Is that what we want for all of our old people? I don't think so. Because what the other side of this story is how we're going economically and how do we compare in social spending with other OECD countries and entitlements, and are things running away from us? So let's have a look at the social expenditure statistics and cash benefits that are paid by the various governments. But what it shows you is that in the OECD, we're the first one, the first bar along there. We pay out less benefits. We're about 8% of our cash benefits. If you go to a country like Belgium, they're up around 18%. Japan is around 12%. And the United States even has more benefits paid out in Social Security than we do, up around 9.5%. So suddenly, although our economy is strong, although our debt is low, our citizens are not being considered in the same light as citizens of other countries. And why is that the case? Why do we have the impression that we're over the top? Because we're not. We have the impression because that's what our politicians tell us. And that's also because there's a concentration of media control in Australia, and it only lets out one particular message. When we look at this statistic, which is public old age expenditure, this is an old one, there's not been a new update, but looking at 2009, you can see at the bottom here, Australia in red, at 5.1% is the amount of our GDP that we spend on people and pensioners. And you have a look along the whole OECD, even the United States spends 6%. And Poland and Italy's up around 13%. Most of the European countries are between 10 and 13%. So despite the fact that we've got a strong economy, is it reasonable that our people get less than half of what most OECD countries pay? And we manufacture another crisis, and that's the baby boomer crisis that everybody's going through, but it's not a real crisis at all. Our pensioners are actually getting are probably about half or less than half of what people get in other advanced economies. And of course, what goes with that is poverty. And Australia, of course, is leading some of the statistics in poverty in the OECD. I haven't got the graph here, but our poverty rate in the OECD is around 14%. And if you look at countries like Croatia, it's far above them. And, you know, we are right up there in the poverty stakes. Doesn't make sense when we've got such a low level of debt, when we've got such a low inflation rate, and we've got such a higher, much lower, rather, unemployment rate, that we pay so much, we don't pay any money at all in relation to supporting our population. And poverty is increasing all of the time. This next graph is talking about health expenditure and the growth in health expenditure, it says, but actually it's just health expenditure per capita annual growth. And you'll see Australia again over here in the red at 2.7%. You look at Slovakia, it's at 10%, the growth rate's there. Korea's 8.7%, Chile's 7.1%. United Kingdom's 4% in actual growth. So is our health budget getting out of control? It doesn't look so if you compare yourself with other countries. So what's the agenda? Why rip so much money out of health? Why have a situation when they're not going to, they're going to make the state governments take responsibility for health? Well, the reason is quite clear. It's because it's an impossibility to run the hospitals on the budgets they're given now in the future. So they're putting pressure on the states to sell our hospitals, to sell our schools, that can be introduced through lobbyists, bought by interest groups, and then the cost of going to hospital, the cost of going anywhere else will increase by 50% in this country. By taking away Medicare, it won't be the government that's paying for it, it'll be you, the taxpayer, the citizens of this country. So this is a grand scheme designed to privatise a lot of the assets in Australia, things like health and other things which are necessary for the good of all Australians to be kept in the public arena. If we look at social expenditure generally, and this is a graph from the OECD social expenditures, and okay, you can see where Australia is, right? We're the one at the bottom. That's where our graph goes to. So certainly, if you look at a whole lot of other countries like Japan, right, or France, or even New Zealand, their social expenditure is much more than we actually give out. It's a complicated story. It's not so headline grabbing to look at some of these statistics, but it's important that we do and that we understand them and we can test the veracity of what the Treasurer is saying and what's said in Parliament. Altogether, the budget's been, what I would say, a disaster for Australians. It's been a budget designed to manufacture a crisis in this country so that structural changes can be made where our economy moves from a mixed economy to a total capitalist economy where all that matters in the economy is money and not people as they go through their lives. It devalues all the things that we value as Australians. It takes no allowance for anything else but the gross domestic product. And you know, the gross domestic product is made up of a number of indicators. It doesn't include the cost of the ambulances. It includes things like the cost of the ambulances that take the carnage every day from our roads in Australia. It includes things like the cost of prisons, the cost of our armies, the cost of our police forces in other states. It includes a lot of things with our courts, our legal system, and the cost of our politicians. But it doesn't include things like the smile on a child's face in the morning, the integrity of our public officials, the value of our marriages, and a lot of those sort of things that really makes you be an Australian. This is what we're about. So in deciding the role of government and what we should do, the government should be there for all the people. First of all, it should have a contract, and that contract should be to tell Australians the truth, not to manufacture things, not to demean individuals and citizens for the rights that they have as members of the Commonwealth to exercise their franchise based on the right information. If I had made some of the statements prior to the last election that the Prime Minister made, and I was a company director, I would be guilty of misleading, deceptive conduct. And I could be charged for that because I misled consumers to support my company. We don't have that standard in politics, unfortunately. So we have a situation where we have a lot of salesmen out there not concerned about your product, only wanting to get the vote, knowing full well that when they've got control of the country, that they can do what they like. They can have you've seen the culture of lobbyists in this country and what's happened right around the nation. It was two years ago, I think just over a year and a half ago, that I resigned from the Liberal Party as a 40-year member, former spokesman for the National Party. I was the youngest life member of the National Party in their history at 36 years of age when I was made a life member. I was a member of the Central Council and then made a life member of the Liberal Party when the LNP merged in Queensland. But I resigned because I took the view that political expediency and the welfare of all Australians was more important than staying in an organisation that was only concerned about lobbyists and concerned about money. I think our country is more important than that, and I think the Anzacs and the ghost of the Anzacs remember us. Again, in the budget, we see a situation where the people that have been attacked have been our youth, which represent our future. The discrimination that's been applied to unemployed youth is beyond the intentions of the framers of the Constitution. It shouldn't matter whether you're old or whether you're young. Your rights as a citizen must be the same. To say that young people, when they leave school, are not eligible for support from the Australian government for being a real Australian only discriminates against them. To make changes, to take away from them their future, to keep them locked up in debt to their 30 or 40, takes away their ability and future and potential for the nation. All of us benefit with a good, strong education. You know, the cost of educating someone for 12 years through high school is only the cost of 1 year's unemployment. A good education policy makes good social policy, but it also makes good economic policy. And that's what we need in this country, good economic policy. But more than anything else in Australia today, we need truth from our politicians. We need vigilance from our journalists to question, and to question them not in generalities but on specific. Why is it so that when the budget, when we say that we are in a bad debt situation, when we've got the lowest debt really in the OECD, in that order, I think we're third, when our debt's only 12% of our GDP and the debt in the OECD on average is 73%. I would have thought as Australians we're doing okay. And the other problem is there's no good news. There's no projection of what Australia might become, no projection how man should be as he was meant to be, free and independent, and there's no hope for the future, and there's no plan for things getting better. Are we as Australians just going to accept our lot if we listen to the guys who are elected in Parliament to say that we're hopeless, we're downtrodden, and there's no help for our economy? Or are we going to take up the challenge? And what could we do? Well, at our party, one of the policies that we took to the last election was the removal of provisional tax dates. Provisional tax is a system whereby businesses in this country pay their tax in advance before they've earned the money. By moving that date from before they've earned it till after they've earned it at the end of the year, we release $70 billion into the economy. That's what's been said in the Ford estimates to Parliament, $70 billion of tax. So you imagine an extra $70 billion injection into our economy without borrowing any money, what that would do for domestic demand and supply. And every time that $70 billion was turned over, the government would get 10% GST. If it's only turned over 3 times, the government gets an additional $21 billion of revenue. And they still get the $70 billion at the end of the year anyway. So why do we suffer from this handicap on our businesses, on our community? Why does it go on when it doesn't have to? When they talk about tax restructuring, we're not talking about increasing the GST, which at the end of the day only affects taxpayers, individual taxpayers. I've got a lot of companies. We pay a lot of GST every year, but it all gets refunded from Treasury because that's how it works. Business pays GST and gets it refunded. The only people who really pay GST is you. So the whole purpose of the GST tax is to avoid the political consequences of increasing income tax. So if we put up the GST 5%, in reality, it's the people of Australia who are paying 5% more tax not the companies, not the businesses, and not the enterprises. And is that a fair thing to do? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it is. And the real story about the old age pension going to 70 has nothing to do about the pension. We have in Australia one of the largest reservoirs of capital and superannuation. And of course, that's a lot of money is being made by a lot of fund managers across this country who are large donors to the Liberal Party. And if they want to keep your money longer to make more fees, why not increase the pension rate, and then the vesting dates for superannuation will be extended. So maybe one day before you die, you can get your super. One day before you die, you'll be able to enjoy that. Isn't that great? Isn't that why 11.5% of your income is paid every year, so that when you reach the age of 70, you'll be able to enjoy life? I'm at 60. I think it would be difficult for me at 70 if I had to wait for all my savings. And what happens if you're a bricklayer, if you're a carpenter, if you're in heavy industry? What happens to your life? In point of fact, 30% of all Australians will be dead before they reach the age of 70. They'll never collect their super, they'll never collect their pension, but a lot of money, a lot of fees will be charged on it. And is that right? Is that what we should stand for? Is that what we want for our children? And these are the questions that has to be asked. These are the agendas that has to be exposed. I'm a member for Fairfax. I donate all of my salary to charity. I've got no interest in whether I'm elected or I'm not elected at the next election. But I've got a strong resolve to serve the people who have elected me today and not put their benefits off for another 10 years and another 10 years, and to highlight the truth for the nation. We can, as Australians, achieve a lot together. We do have a preeminent position in the world. We have a small population, a dynamic economy, and we have low debt. If we adopted the policies that President Obama has utilised in the United States, where he's stimulated the economy every month since the GFC, there's been $85 billion injected into the US economy. And even as we talk today, the US economy is getting $65 billion injected into it for stimulus, for growth, for job creation and further exports, for increases in the balance of payments. He's stimulated that economy. And as I said, we can do the same thing by just changing the date of our provisional taxation. And as Europe has an austerity policy, as the economy spirals down and down, here in Australia they want to follow that route. And what does that mean? It means a great republic who's our trading partner, who's stronger, who's got more growth, will take more of our export markets and will be regulated to a different competitive position in Asia. And we, as Australians, can't allow that to happen. We've got to think that we're every bit as good as anyone in the world, that we can go forward with a confidence in what we stand for, and we can take up the challenge of the Anzacs and make this country all it was meant to be. Thanks very much.